Hey folks, how's it going? So today we have two speakers here for comparison. We have the Klipsch RP600m and we have the Triangle Titus EZ speakers. Now this comparison is pretty interesting because right off the bat, the Klipsch is a bigger speaker while the Triangle is a mini speaker, mini bookshelf speaker. And both are horn-loaded designs and both have been talked about on this channel quite a bit, and people have been asking me, when is the Triangle going to be reviewed? And what better way, I was thinking, what better way to do the review than to compare it to the Klipsch RP600m? Because these are pretty similar in some regard and very different in other regards. So let's get into it. So in terms of sound, really the Triangle doesn't stray away in terms of performance compared to the RP600m. Just because the RP600m is a bigger speaker, it doesn't really necessarily mean that the Triangle is a less of a better speaker. And that kind of surprised me too, but we'll talk about that as we go down onto this video. Now let's talk about the horn design for a bit. The horn design on the Klipsch is very typical. It is their own design with the Tactrix horn-loaded design, but the Triangle is really more interesting to me. It is very, very innovative, and I've never seen something like it before. In fact, they designed it themselves, so that probably makes sense. Now, in terms of the woofer on the Klipsch is a ceramic copper material, and the Triangle uses predominantly a paper material. Now, that is interesting to me for the Triangle because it kind of reminds me of the 4311 in terms of sound characteristics of a paper cone. It really makes me think of the JBL 4311 that I had a while back. And I talk about that to a lot of my friends and the MBT studio guys all the time because I really bought that speaker for one reason, to listen to Michael Jackson's Billie Jean. Now, I love that song and I wanted to hear it out of the 4311 because I read somewhere in the library that Michael Jackson's Billie Jean was mastered and recorded with the JBL 4311s. Now, I got the 4311s and I really fell in love with it, started playing, multiple tracks on it, and I ended up selling it because I needed the money at the time. But I really regret selling that speaker. And I'm still looking to repurchase it, but it seems like it's kind of getting rare and rare. So who knows? Maybe. But I got the Triangles for myself, and I'm kind of really, really happy with it because it sounds like the JBL 4311 in terms of dynamic clarity and the speed. The sheer speed really matches with the 4311s. But one thing that the Triangle does better than the JBL 4311 is probably imaging and more refinement. The JBL 4311s didn't really image all that well. Now, moving on to the Klipsch speakers. Now, in terms of, I'm comparing it to JBLs for some reason now, but the Titus is actually more dynamic than the Klipsch speakers, than the RP600Ms. And that may come to you as a surprise, and it came to me as a surprise, so it surely would come to you as a surprise. I mean, just by looking at it, if you ask me which speaker should sound more dynamic, I would be like, well, the speaker is bigger, if I didn't know better, right? But in fact, the Triangle sounds more dynamic, more fast, more punchy, and in fact, it goes down lower in terms of frequency response. So this has more sub-bass than the Klipsch RP600m. So I really like the mid-bass and the bottom end of the Triangle. The dynamic capability of the Triangle really surprised me. And they're small enough to fit on your desktop, but they certainly did a smashing job in my stereo system. Now, with that being said, the Klipsch has a more open top end. It has more air, it has more detail, it has more clarity on the top end than the Triangle. Now, that's not to say that the Triangle doesn't sound open. It certainly does. It's a horn designed speaker. So now we're not talking about, in comparison to dome speakers. If I had to really kind of lay things down, this tweeter here, the Triangle, kind of falls between the Klipsch RP600m, like a horn design, and a dome design. So it sits somewhere in the middle, which I think, to my personal taste, was perfect amount of openness on the top end. Now some may find, and some may have already found, that the Klipsch RP600m was a little bit too bright on the top end for some people. It wasn't for me, but some people did report that they found it a little bit too shimmery on the top. The triangle is a good way to go down if you found this speaker a little bit more bright, because this kind of still has a liveliness to it, but not as much as the Klipsch speakers. Now both of these speakers are back ported, and so if you put it towards the back more, you get more bass response for both of these speakers. And I found that with the Klipsch, you want it about 6 or even 5 inches from the wall, and I kind of liked the triangle a little bit closer to the wall, around 4 inches into from the wall. Which is not a huge difference in distance, but that's kind of like where I found the sweet spot for each of the speakers respectively. And in terms of imaging, I found that the triangle did a better job of imaging. I found the Klipsch speakers to image a little bit less, but have a more of an organic soundstage in terms of comparison with soundstage. I found the Klipsch RP600m to have a larger soundstage than the triangle. So it's a trade-off, I guess, in that aspect. Now, both of these speakers, I found that if you put it facing it towards the room instead of tilting them, you get a little bit of a less brighter response. If you kind of find that you are getting a lot of good imaging, but you were kind of fatigued from all the high frequencies shouting at you, then I suggest you try tilting them towards the room instead of directly at you. Now, other than that, let's talk about the mid-range. So the mid-range is, on both of these speakers, a slightly laid back. Now I'm talking about the upper mid-ranges specifically. Both of these speakers have like a kind of pulled response. It's kind of lean on the upper mid-range, and then as you progress to more of the lower frequencies of the mid-range, if you know what I'm talking about, it becomes a little bit more fuller sounding. So you kind of get, in some tracks, you kind of get that pulled back response. And I actually had that response when I was playing a song. If I remember correctly, it was one of the songs from the Carpenters, and I don't remember which song specifically, but it was one of the Carpenters, and I got that kind of pullback from the upper frequencies, upper mid ranges. So that's the only caveat I can really think of in terms of frequency response and the way they sound. Now, this is bi-wireable, this is not. This is just a single binding post, this is dual binding post, and so you can bi-wire this or bi-amp this if you wish to. Now, one thing in terms of sound quality that I really have to comment is the tonality of the triangle. It's just so tasteful. It's so tasteful and correct, like the strings and the violin, even some of the vocals just sounded so tonally correct, just musical. In comparison to the Klipsch RP600m, which is still a musical speaker, the triangle still, blasted most of the speakers in this price range that I've heard so far in terms of tonality. The tonal characteristics of the triangle is really something to be respected and enjoyed. So if you're a tonal freak, and I certainly am to a certain extent, and if you really like and respect tonal characteristics that are just totally musical and makes you like smile every time, because it really does make me smile. So then if it does, then the triangle is certainly a beautiful choice. You will not regret it. If you're a tonal freak, the triangle is seriously the best bang for the buck out there in terms of what I've heard so far. Now, in terms of pairing, both of these speakers are pretty particular in terms of pairing. Now, RP600m the Klipsch is slightly less particular, but you still want to have kind of like a warmer sounding amplifier or unit with the RP600M. As for the triangle, it's slightly less forgiving in terms of pairing. You do want to pair it with a more kind of luscious sounding amplifier for full body enjoyment, get a little bit more of a warmer response. And so tube amplifiers go pretty well with this triangle speaker. As well, I found the Atoll to go really well with it, and I've been actually getting a really good improvement from upgrading my Atoll IN30 to the IN200, which is going to be coming out for review, and that's the main amplifier, integrated amplifier I've been using. The IN200 really pushed both of these speakers to a phenomenal detail and warmth and dynamic capabilities. So I really enjoy that match. Now I also have the IOVX here, the SA3 integrated amplifier. I haven't had the chance to listen to them with these speakers for a long period of time, just because there's so much stuff that that's going on in the studio right now. But I did get to listen to them for about 2 hours each. And when I did that, it didn't give me that kind of warmth and dynamicality the Atolls did. Now mind you, the Atoll is more expensive, but what the Idol VX did was kind of give you that warmth at a budget. Now also, there was slightly, just ever so slightly more edge compared to the Atoll. Mind you, this is not a fair comparison. This is just to kind of give you basis on what to expect when you're going up in the line with amplifiers pairing to these speakers. Now the Idol VX is very good for the price, very budget friendly, and it's a good starting point with these speakers. But I do have to warn you, you're gonna get slightly more articulate presentation. Now, some of you may like that, but to me it was a little bit slightly more edgy than the Atoll, and I kind of found, myself not playing certain tracks because I would get that edgy response more on certain tracks. So in conclusion, both of these speakers, you need a good matching amplifier, and Atoll is a good option if you're on a budget. The Iota VX is certainly a good stepping stone for now. Now, for those of you guys still watching this video right now, I'm going to give you an interesting story. So I was playing YouTube. Now, if you watch this up until now and you hear me talking about playing out of YouTube and playing out of, very poorly recorded songs, that's a pretty good gift right there. I was playing poorly, and I mean poorly recorded music. And because I have songs that I like that's just not very well recorded. Okay, I'm gonna be honest. I have songs that are just absolutely shit in terms of quality, and I still enjoy them, and they're not available in high quality. So, oh well. But when I played it on the RP600M, it was unbearable. It was unbearably bad. The RP600M, the Klipsch, is very unforgiving to poorly recorded tracks. It still plays, but it just doesn't convey it very well. It gets too bright, and you kind of hear all the distortion going on and the compression, etc. Now the Triangle, of course, does a very similar thing, but the Triangle is much more forgiving. It's more forgiving in terms of poorly recorded tracks. In fact, I had no problems really listening to poorly recorded tracks out of the Triangle for the most part. Now, I did have some songs that were just garbage. Those songs, I've never heard it good, but the Triangle still made it somewhat decent. So the Triangle is really more of a forgiving speaker and more enjoyable speaker in that regard. So thank you for watching, guys, and I'll see you guys in the next one.